My brother always had this strange talent for pretending his life was perfect, while quietly letting everyone else around him shoulder the consequences of his choices. And for most of my life, I let myself believe that it wasn't my place to question it, because that's what our mother taught me. He's the older one, sweetheart. You don't understand his pressures. As if being born 3 years earlier somehow turned him into a delicate prince who needed the entire family to bend around his irresponsibility. And maybe that's why at 4:30 in the morning on the coldest night of December, when I heard desperate pounding on my front door, I didn't immediately expect to see his 2 little kids, 5 and 7 years old, standing on my porch in nothing but thin pajamas, their hair messy, their faces blotchy from crying, their little hands red and trembling from the cold. And the sight hit me so violently that for a second I forgot how to breathe, because no matter what mistakes adults make, children should never have to carry the consequences, never be left out in the icy dark begging for help from the one person their parents constantly belittled. I yanked open the door and the cold wind cut across my face like a warning, but the little ones rushed forward and wrapped their freezing arms around my legs before I could even speak, and I felt their tiny bodies shaking, not just from the cold but from fear, real fear, the kind children shouldn't know. And I pulled them inside immediately, locking the door, grabbing blankets, kneeling down to hold them against me as I asked, as gently as I could, "Where are your mom and dad?" But the 2 of them wouldn't answer. They just looked at each other with these terrified glances like they'd seen something horrible or had been told not to speak. It took nearly 10 minutes, warm cocoa, and the soft promise that they weren't in trouble for them to finally open up. And even then, the 7-year-old, Emily, spoke in that cautious small voice kids use when they think their honesty might get them punished. And she said they had been in the car with their mom when she and my brother started screaming at each other again, shouting about money and babysitting and "that useless sister of yours." And then the argument apparently turned into something else, some twisted plan my brother had that involved dropping the kids off with me just for a night. But instead of knocking, their parents fought the whole way, forgot the kids were even in the back seat. And when they finally pulled up outside my house, they didn't even stay long enough to bring them to the door. They apparently told the kids to "go wake your aunt," and then drove off again because, as the younger one whispered with a cracking voice, "Daddy said he didn't have time for this." And the part that made my stomach twist wasn't the irresponsibility, that I'd come to expect. It was the realization that they hadn't even checked if I was awake, home, or even alive. They dumped 2 little children outside at 4:30 a.m. in winter cold that could have put them in the hospital. And if the kids hadn't knocked hard enough, if I had been asleep, if I hadn't heard, and the rage that simmered inside me wasn't loud, it wasn't fiery, it was cold, steady, a pulse of something that had been waiting years to rise. Because this wasn't the first time my brother assumed I'd fix his problems. He'd borrowed money, crashed on my couch, used my car, and then mocked me when I couldn't attend a family trip because of finances he himself helped ruin. But this was different. This was the line, the one you don't cross, not when it comes to innocent kids who didn't choose their parents. I didn't call him immediately. My priority was the children. But as the sunrise crept across the windows and the kids slept curled under thick blankets on my couch, I finally allowed myself to process the unbelievable reality. My brother and his wife drove away from their children, left them in freezing December air, and didn't bother to check whether the door was even opened. And in that moment, with the quiet house holding only the soft breathing of those 2 little souls, I realized something heavy and painful. No one in our family had ever protected me from being discarded, forgotten, or taken for granted. But I was not going to repeat that cycle with his kids. I made a silent promise right then, one that would grow into something much bigger, that whatever storm was coming next, I was finished being the person my brother tossed responsibility onto and walked away. I was going to protect these kids, even if it meant confronting the family dynamic that had allowed my brother to become someone capable of abandoning his own children in the dark.
Had the police report confirming they'd been dropped off via Uber without supervision, and the building security had to escort her off the property because she refused to leave, cursing so loudly that a neighbor across the hall opened their door to see what was happening. By morning, my phone was flooded with texts from unknown numbers. My sister's friends, apparently, calling me a monster, a liar, a snake, a childless witch who didn't understand how hard parenting is. Messages clearly orchestrated by my sister, who was always excellent at recruiting flying monkeys to defend her, no matter how wrong she was. But something inside me had shifted, hardened, perhaps. Or maybe strengthened, because instead of crying like I would have in the past, I blocked each number one by one, made breakfast for the kids, and waited for the social worker's scheduled visit. And when she arrived and interviewed them privately, I sat in the kitchen with a pit in my stomach, wondering whether the kids would defend their mother or whether they would tell the truth. And when the social worker returned with a heavy expression, she said gently, "They told me their mother leaves them alone often and that they're scared to tell anyone because she gets angry." And hearing those words made my heart twist, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed every suspicion I had pushed aside for years, every instinct I had ignored to keep the peace, every red flag I excused because she was my sister, because I wanted to believe she was just overwhelmed, not reckless, not dangerous. And the social worker said a temporary custody evaluation might be necessary if the pattern continued, and I nodded, feeling torn between loyalty to the person who shared my childhood and responsibility to the children who had no one else looking out for them. Meanwhile, my sister posted a long, dramatic Facebook rant claiming her evil sibling had stolen her babies and called cops for no reason. And the comments were divided. Some supporting her blind date, others asking skeptical questions. And members of our extended family called me nonstop to demand I fix this mess by apologizing to her. But I refused, because this time the truth mattered more than their comfort. Things escalated when my sister tried to force her way into my building again the following day, after she saw pictures of her kids coloring at my dining table. The social worker had taken photos for documentation, and my sister accused me of brainwashing them and trying to take her place as their mother, shouting hysterically until security threatened to call the police again. And watching her unravel like that, publicly, chaotically, made me realize that she wasn't just irresponsible, she was spiraling, clinging to control with both hands, unwilling to face the truth of her own actions. And instead of feeling satisfaction or vindication, I felt a deep, aching sadness, because I wish she had gotten help long before things reached this point. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room, lights off, city lights flickering outside my window, thinking about how this situation wasn't just about one Uber ride or one night. It was about years of her using me as a safety net, years of her assuming I existed to pick up her responsibilities, years of her believing she was entitled to my time, my energy, my home, my life. And now that I'd finally said no, she exploded like a volcano of resentment she had been storing for years. The next morning, the social worker called with her decision. The children would stay with me temporarily until a formal hearing. And though relief washed over me, fear followed immediately after, because I knew my sister would retaliate, would lash out, would aim her fury at me like an arrow. And I wasn't wrong, because exactly 12 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from her that chilled me in a way her screaming never could. "You think you've won. You haven't even seen what I'm capable of yet." And that was the moment, standing in my kitchen with the morning sun slanting through the blinds, two innocent kids sleeping safely in the next room, that I realized that this wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was a war my sister had declared, one I never wanted, but was now forced to fight. Not for myself, but for the children she had treated like disposable packages the night she put them in that Uber. And I knew the days ahead would test every piece of strength I had left. When I said no to babysitting my sister's kids, I thought that would be the end of it. Clear, simple, respectful boundaries. The kind adults are supposed to understand. But with my sister, Tara, boundaries were like yellow traffic lights. Not a warning, just a challenge to speed through. I still remember her reaction when I refused. The offended gasp, the dramatic pause, the accusation that I was selfish, even though she had asked me last minute on a Monday evening, knowing fully well that I worked night shifts and had finally earned a rare day off, a day I had been planning for weeks to catch up on sleep and finally clean the apartment that had slowly turned into a laundry battlefield. And as usual, Tara turned the conversation into a guilt trip Olympics, going on about how exhausted she was, how unhelpful her husband had been, how no one ever supports her, ignoring the reality that she had dumped her kids on everyone in the family for years. But this time, I stayed firm. Not angry, just honest. I can't. I need to rest, I said. And she hung up with a passive-aggressive, fine, whatever. But I didn't think she'd actually do something insane. I genuinely believed she would find another sitter or cancel her plans like a normal parent. Because despite everything, I still assumed my sister had some sliver of responsibility left in her, that she wouldn't put her own children at risk just to prove a point or punish me. I was wrong. Very, very wrong. The doorbell rang around 6:45 p.m., long after I'd already taken melatonin, dimmed all the lights, and wrapped myself in a blanket burrito on the couch, ready to disappear into a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was a package, until I heard the faint, confused voices of children outside, voices I recognized. I dragged myself to the door, heart thudding, annoyance rising, only to open it and see two wide-eyed kids, my niece Lily and nephew Jonah, standing there with backpacks, jackets half-zipped, and an Uber driver behind them wearing a deeply uncomfortable expression. Before I could even form a question, the driver held up his phone and said, "Hi, are you Ava? Their mom booked a ride to drop them off here." And I swear, my blood went from warm to boiling in seconds. "She what?" I asked him, staring at him as if the words might rearrange into something less horrific. But no, my sister had actually put her kids in a stranger's car and sent them across the city without asking me, without warning me, without even making sure I was awake or home. The driver explained awkwardly that Tara told him I was expecting them, that everything was arranged, and he looked nervous, like he knew something about this entire situation was wrong, but didn't want trouble. I assured him I would take responsibility for the kids because what else could I do? Send them back alone again? The man looked relieved, the kids looked confused, and I looked like I was 2 seconds away from combusting. Once I got them inside, the first thing I did was check if they were okay. Physically, emotionally, everything. They were fine, just confused and a little scared. Jonah, who was only 5, kept asking, "Auntie, why didn't you come pick us up?" And Lily whispered, "Mom said you were happy to watch us because you had nothing else to do." And that sentence stung like acid because it was such a classic Tara lie, framing me as the free, idle, childless sister whose time meant nothing. I fed them dinner, turned on cartoons to settle them, and texted Tara with the fury of 1,000 suppressed childhood resentments. I didn't yell, didn't insult, didn't curse, but every word I typed was sharpened with controlled rage. "You put your kids in an Uber to my house after I told you no. What is wrong with you?" She didn't respond immediately, which scared me because Tara's usually glued to her phone. But after 20 minutes, she finally replied with, "Relax. They're with you. They're safe. I needed a night out. You're making this dramatic." Dramatic. A word she has used my entire life to minimize my feelings, my boundaries, my time, my existence. I called her. She declined my call. I called again. Declined. I texted, "If something happened to them in that car, you'd be in jail." She responded with a voice note saying, "Oh, please, nothing happened. Stop acting like I abandoned them on the side of the road. You always overreact. You've never been a mom, so you don't get it." I stared at the screen, trembling, realizing my sister genuinely didn't understand or didn't care that this was not only negligent, but illegal. The anger I felt wasn't loud. It was quiet, heavy, condensed into a single, chilling clarity. She wasn't going to learn. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to take accountability. And I suddenly understood why her kids were always exhausted, always anxious, always clingy. Because this was their life. I tucked the children into my bed, letting them sleep while I paced the living room in the dark, my mind replaying every red flag from the last few years. Tara bragging about leaving the kids in the car just for 5 minutes, Tara missing school pickups because she lost track of time, Tara expecting everyone else to cover for her, Tara pretending motherhood was a burden she never signed up for. And now this, sending 2 little kids across the city in an Uber just because she didn't feel like parenting that night. Around 10:30 p.m., she finally called back, slurring, loud music in the background, her voice high and carefree. Why are you freaking out? Like, I was the one being unreasonable. They're with you. They're safe. I needed a night out. You're making this dramatic. You could have gotten them kidnapped, I snapped. Do you even hear yourself? She scoffed and said something that flipped a switch inside me. Look, if something happened, the driver would be responsible, not me. So stop stressing. That was it. That was the moment I realized my sister was not just irresponsible, she was delusional and dangerous. I told her she needed to come get them now, but she said she was still at the bar and couldn't drive, adding, just put them to sleep at my place, I'll grab them in the morning, as if she had forced this entire situation on me like some kind of twisted punishment for saying no. I hung up. I blocked her. And I stood in the hallway staring at the closed door of my bedroom where her children slept peacefully for what felt like ages. My chest tightened, not with anger anymore, but with worry for them. They deserved better than this. They deserved stability, safety, a mother who wouldn't risk their lives for convenience. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't something I could just let go for the sake of family harmony. When morning came, Tara was on my porch banging like a debt collector, screaming, "Open the door, I know you're in there." Her hair was a mess, makeup smeared, clothes from last night still on. She looked hungover, irritated, not concerned. The moment I opened the door, she shoved past me and snapped, "Where are they? Did you feed them junk again?" I didn't answer immediately. I just watched her try to gather her superiority, trying to convince herself she was the victim here. When the kids ran to her, their excitement faded quickly at her annoyed expression. "Come on," she said. "Mommy's tired." No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. And that's when I took a deep breath and said, "We need to talk. What you did was illegal, and I'm reporting it." Tara froze, her face draining of color before contorting into the ugliest glare I've ever seen. "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me," I said. The kids watched silently, and Tara's anger simmered into a hissed whisper. "You're doing this